All set? Cool.
Yeah. Welcome to another episode of Kickback with Hartke. I am here with the iconic Billy Sheehan. You might have heard of him on a couple of records throughout the years. Billy, thank you for stopping by.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Very nice.
So, what's going on nowadays with you? I know we've heard you play with David Lee Roth. We've heard you play with Paul Gilbert and Mr. Big. We've heard you with Winery Dogs. What else is going on in your life?
Well, I'm practicing a lot, probably more than I ever have. People used to laugh at me, come over to my house, my apartment, and I'd answer the door with the bass on. Say, don't you ever put that thing down? Like, well, actually, no, I don't. I was always practicing, always playing, always working on it. And now, usually as people get older, they slack off on it. But actually, I don't know why, I'm reinvigorated to do more and learn more and get better and more depth of understanding of what's going on in this thing. And after playing, and I think it's good for younger players to understand, or anyone really, after 50-some years of playing, there's still a universe of stuff I haven't even touched on yet. So the adventure never ends. So that's kind of cool. And I don't know, I don't have any natural talent. I never did. I just worked at it and figured it out and got it. You know, I'm a good troubleshooter, not only on bass, but I can also figure out, why the lights aren't working, that kind of troubleshooting. So I like that. So that helps me as a player to discover new things. And it's so great to understand that there's no limit to how much you can know and how much you can understand. And it seems like this oddball curve, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, which is, I don't know when that's going to ever end and flip over the other side, but maybe someday, or maybe never. I'll be happy with that.
Well, that's great. It's always interesting to hear, like, someone who has been doing it so long to say, like, all right, I'm not slowing down. I'm going to keep doing this. You're always writing. You're playing with very different styles of music with the different musicians. How do you approach that? So with the Winery Dogs, you have like kind of one style, like maybe it's a little more roots or like blues kind of going on there, and then you have Niacin, where you've written things with a organ trio.
Yeah.
So how do you approach that when you're at home and you're in the studio or you're practicing?
Well, I don't necessarily practice for any one thing or focus on any one thing when I'm writing, but fortunately, I'm as old as I am, which is a good thing. I got to see Hendrix play, and when I was very young, we listened to all kinds of music. There weren't the blinders on like they have now, or this genre-specific thing, which may be a good thing. It may be in its own separate world. Maybe I'm not criticizing it, but we listen to everything. So at any given time, any piece of music could be played by almost anyone in any genre. A truly great song can be played many different ways. A few years ago, I think, like lounge singers doing heavy metal, it didn't really work, but it was interesting. You could make it work. When you hear Sinatra singing, those songs work in many different genres. So I think rather than get band or genre specific, you just go and then try to adapt what you're doing to fit within the confines of a particular style. And sometimes it doesn't completely fit, and that's not always a bad thing, because then you push the edges of that style around a little bit. I mean, when the Beatles started, it was, I Want to Hold Your Hand, it was love songs. Then it grew to something deeper and more emotional and darker and then psychedelic, and it was all over the map eventually stylistically. And that kind of was one of the burning spots of rock and roll spilling over its edges and becoming so much more, from prog rock to blues rock to southern rock to synth pop rock, all kinds of things that happened there, I think came from people not necessarily coloring within the lines all the time.
And you talk about pushing the boundaries a little bit, and throughout the years there's been a lot of like bass players who have like kind of, you might not even think of them like, oh, there's the bass player is maybe driving the band sometimes, and a lot of times with the Beatles, Paul McCartney's lines were amazing, and a lot of the prog bands, like a Chris Squire's lines, like really stuck out. Who like comes to mind when you were growing up? You're like, wow, that really stuck out. That's what I want to do.
Well, there's a guy named Paul Samuel Smith and the Yardbirds. And the Yardbirds are famous because they had 3 guitarists through the years. 3, Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck. So that was pretty noteworthy. But the other guys in the band, Keith Relf was the singer, amazing harmonica player. I mean, mind-blowingly great harmonica. But Paul Samuel Smith, as a bass player, he did call and response with Jeff Beck, and he did some just lines that were just amazing. At the time, it was Yngwie of bass. You listen to it now, you have to think of the time it happened when you listen to some things. A lot of music is like that. I saw recently a comment that broke my heart. It made me weep for the future, where some young kids, Jocko was overrated. I go, no. If you lived at the time when Jocko came out, he changed the world. And okay, now looking back at that through today's eyes, you may not think it's anything revolutionary. I know people that listen to Hendrix and go, well, he wasn't always in tune, and his guitar didn't sound. No, hold on a second, he changed the world. I don't care if he was out of tune. It was that amazing. So getting into different players as I grew, another really huge influence on me was Tim Bogert with a band called the Vanilla Fudge. And I think they're one of the bands that never wrote a song that I know of. The other one was Three Dog Night, who had millions of hits. They never wrote any songs. I don't think Sinatra wrote anything. I don't think Elvis wrote anything. So some of these iconic bands never did. The Beatles, they changed all that. They did a lot already. But Tim Bogert, they took like Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles and did the psychedelic, slow, amazing version of it. And Tim was all over the place. Brilliant playing, almost saxophone-like. And he also sang great. And he was a huge influence on me. But every player that I've been exposed to has had some influence on me. And every genre, too. I listen a lot to classical music. When I grew up, my mom listened to Sinatra, Tony Bennett, Ella Fitzgerald, Bobby Darin, great singers. So it wasn't just bass players, guitar players too, of course. A lot of great guitar players, because it's frets and strings, so they do kind of cross-pollinate occasionally.
Cool. So like you said you saw Hendrix as a teenager. What was that like? Because again, I was never around to see Hendrix, and I mean it's got to be life-altering, right? Kind of, right? We had to get down to downtown Buffalo to the War Memorial Auditorium. We lived out in the suburbs, so we didn't know how to get there. We didn't know what bus to take. And we got there late. We walked in. The opening act was Soft Machine. They already started playing, and we walked in, and we were just dazed already. We were young, and then Hendrix came out, and he was just kind of standing on the mic stand, on the base of it, like playing, like he wasn't moving around or anything. And we're going, Jimmy, what's wrong? And he opened up with Let Me Stand Next to Your Fire. The solo came, he jumped off, put the guitar, and the whole place, doesn't mind. And to be in a crowd of people that big, I had never been in a crowd of people that big before, of like mind also, where we're all watching Jimi Hendrix. It was an amazing experience. And touched me on many levels, not only what a concert is and why it's great to go in a group of people and see a band live. That was an amazing thing. To see Jimmy play blew my mind. And I was a huge Hendrix fan from the very moment I heard him. And just the moment in time that was. It was an incredible thing. Nobody had heard that yet. You hear feedback all the time now and whammy bar all the time, but nobody heard that until Jimmy came along. Pretty amazing. So growing up in Buffalo, you started playing music. Why bass? Why was that the instrument for you?
A guy that lived around the corner from me, his name was Joe Hesse, dear friend of mine. He was a great bass player. The local bands that were fantastic, excellent bands always. And I wanted to be like him because he was cool. He had a cool haircut, best-looking girlfriend, drove a Triumph motorcycle, and he played bass. So he let me pick it up one time, and I was just a little kid, and I took my finger and plugged in and got a blister right away. It bit back, so it was kind of a match made in heaven. I remember picking the thing up, thinking it's so huge, and then I'd see the guitar, and it'd be tiny, little thin, little strings, and I don't want anything to do with that. Then he'd bring his amp, and he actually custom-made a triple Showman. A dual Showman was a Fender cabinet with 215s in it. He made a triple Showman. Him and his dad, they built it. And then, 2 or 3 guys carrying it down the stairs. Then the guitar player would show up with his little twin reverb. I think, I want the big amp. Foolishly, not realizing the bass player is the workhorse of the band, along with the drummer. The guitar player and singer get all the glory. I didn't know that then. I don't think it would have affected my decision, but I wanted to be like Joe, and I was sleeping in bed at night, and I was much younger, so my older brother and sisters would be hanging out with him and his band in his basement around the corner, so I could hear the bass at night. You hear the bass coming through the crowd, through the distance, like you hear a car with a subwoofer now. You hear it off in the distance. So I'd hear the bass, and think, that's Joe. He's playing. So it was just exciting for me to be around a guy like that, and he's still one of my dearest friends.
That's great.
Pretty cool.
And so you pick up the bass. We know how well you play the instrument, but experimenting with gear and things, even just experimenting with wiring of the bass. How did that become part of your repertoire? What fascinated you about everything just on the electronic side and not just the playing? Well,
it was my dad had a very good mechanical aptitude. My brother also as well, and also in electronics. And I grew up in a time when you took things apart and opened them up. Every time we got a new piece of gear, I even did this with the Eventide 910 harmonizer. When I first got it, I had to unscrew it and look inside. And there were 2 tiers of circuit boards, one on a hinge that would fold up with all these computer chips. Never seen anything like that. We always any amp we would get, we'd have to open it up and look inside. So, of course, at some point, you got to take the thing apart and look around in there and see what's going on. And you learn how to do your own wiring and your own pickups and your own fixing, because we didn't have crew guys, and there was no place you could really go for that. You figure it out yourself or you're out of luck. And the first bass I got was a P bass, but before it came into the store, Art Kubera Music at 910 Fillmore at Sycamore, before it came in, he let me take a Gibson EBO bass, which is kind of like what Paul Samuel Smith played. He played the Epiphone Rivoli, which is a version very similar, 335 body, but it had the big, fat, giant humbucker pickup there. And it was super deep, ultra low end. And that was a tone I recognized from the Yardbirds record. And also, Paul McCartney's Hofner had that neck position pickup. So the really super deep, low bass from the song, like When the Rain Comes, it was a distinctive tone used on a lot of records at the time. It fell out of fashion for a while, but still that super deep, low end, you couldn't get any other way with that neck position pickup. So I love the P bass, but I remembered the sound of the bass I had for a couple days before I got it. So I think I had written to Gibson. And they sent me one. I don't remember even paying for it, because I didn't have a checking account. I don't know how I would have. There was no credit cards. I didn't know how I would pay with it. So there was a space on my P bass right here. So I said, well, let's go for it. I took it apart, and I had a little rudimentary wood shop training, and I managed to get it in there. I didn't know how to wire both to one output, so I did a separate output, and which people criticized me for that in later years. Why didn't you just use a stereo chord? Well, in fact, it saved my life a couple times that I didn't do that, because if a stereo chord breaks and you're in Elmira, New York at 12 midnight, how do you replace it? You don't, but you got a mono chord all the time. So the 2 mono chords worked out great. It also was a visual effect too for the non-musician watching. Wow, there's 2 chords coming out of the bass. That's twice as loud. That's the mentality of that. A little bit of showbiz in there. So I initially ran it into 2 channels of my Fender Super Bassman amp. Then eventually got a second amp, ran the low, super low, and the high, a little higher. And that double thing became a real big help, being in a 3-piece band, playing in clubs, because you had a lot more tonal spectrum. Then I found out later, all the original alembic basses, handmade basses, one of the first widely available handmade custom kind of instrument, they all had a dual output. All the Rickenbackers had a second thing with a Rico Sound, which was a stereo plug. They used a stereo plug for that dual output. I read, I think it's true, John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin split his pickups on his jazz bass to 2 amps. Neil Berghofer, I think it's his name, I hope I didn't say it wrong, the guy who did the Barney Miller bass line. I saw his bass in LA at a guitar shop, and he had the Gibson humbucker pickup in the same place I did. So The only reason I bring that up is it validated that I wasn't completely out of my mind by doing it, and it did serve a real purpose to have that dual output. And now it's helped me a lot. A lot of times I just play regular bass. I just plug into that pickup like a regular P bass and play normally if I'm jamming or something. It's perfectly fine. But having that extra thing there and tinkering around and getting used to what's going on inside here really gives you a better understanding of this thing. So I think it helps with your playing too. Though there's a lot of amazing players that have no idea what's going on in there. I think it's just getting inside, like a race car driver that didn't know how a carburetor worked. I'm not, how could you explain to him? No, you see when you go around the curve. I don't know how it works, but that idea that the more you know about it, and then you can start customizing it to you. And this is my Yamaha bass, and it's very customized to me. So I'd be playing and maybe fighting against the instrument or some configuration, file something down or move something over a little bit. And so, it's a little easier now. Yeah, or adjust this. Okay, I got it now. And so you slowly fine tune it you adjust to it, it adjusts to you, till eventually you can get this unified thing and possibly move ahead. Who knows?
So you talked about also filing, you scalped the frets on the bass.
Yeah.
So when did you start doing that, and why did you do that?
Well, Talus, my band from Buffalo, opened up for Yngwie Malmsteen in his first tour. A little known side note, Yngwie was brought to America initially to start a band with me. That was the purpose. I was in Buffalo. He ended up on the West Coast. Logistics didn't work out. He went off and did his own thing. But now here we were together on tour. And I got up at the end of the night and jammed with him. Stuff like that. It was great. Just an amazing guitar player. So I'd seen scalloping before. John McLaughlin and Mahavishnu Orchestra did some scalloping, so I knew about it. I think Rishi Blackmore did a little bit of it too. But when I finally got up close and saw it, I got my Dremel Moto tool with me. So I took the bass and I laid it down, took the strings off, and going across all the way wouldn't have done much good because you can't push that string down to the wood no matter what anyway. So I just went halfway. And I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On the fifth one, it slipped and went across the fret. So I had to polish them off. And I said, let's stop, let's quit while I'm ahead. And we just did that. So in fact, it helps you to get your finger underneath it, get a really
nice bend. Strong
bend. Good thing about this, a P bass only goes up to E flat. I get an extra fret on here, which is an E, which is a very essential note for rock music. A lot of things are in E. Then you can bend that up to a G, which is handy also, which is in the key of E minor.
Yep.
It helps a little bit to help get your fingers on there, but it's not a real essential thing. But when we did this bass, we grandfathered in a lot of the modifications, the pickup that I explained earlier, a lot of the modifications into one, but done properly, as opposed to my chisel on the living room floor, my mom having to vacuum up the chips.
Well, it's also, I guess, that no fear of I'm going to go in, I'm going to try it and see what happens. And
I don't know if I would, these are expensive basses. They're handmade. I don't know if I would go chiseling into one now, but my P bass cost $250 with case. But back then, that was equivalent to thousands of dollars for the kind of money I had or was available to me. So it was pretty courageous of me. But I had confidence because, like I said, we were tinkerers. We get in and what happens if you change that? Or what about this? So we didn't really look at it. I looked at it more as a tool. That's how I look at all my instruments. Not so much, I don't keep them pristine or polished up there. I get on stage and they get hit hard and they get sweated on. They're workhorse instruments for me.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it's a tool. It's a part of your trade, right?
Very much.
It's not just something to stick on the wall and look at. So
yeah.
So you got to Talus, and then you had this opportunity with David Lee Roth came around.
Yeah.
And is that the first time you started to play with Steve Vai at that time as well?
We knew each other, and we were going to maybe work together. We were both on the same label, Talus and Steve Vai on the Relativity Records, and we thought about doing something. And then when I went to L.A., Dave said he wanted to start a band with me. And so I said, great. He goes, we'll find a guitar player, we'll get a drummer, and we'll do a band. I said, fantastic, great. He goes, the guitar player he's looking at was Steve Stevens from Billy Idol. It was great and awesome. But I think Stevens wanted to stick with his gig with Billy Idol. It was right then, he thought about it a bit, but decided not to. So then I told Dave, I know another Steve, because I knew of Steve Vai from before. And as it turns out, I think Steve Vai was the perfect choice because he comes from that Zappa sense of humor. And then we worked together, wrote Eat 'Em and Smile together in Dave's basement. And one of my songs from Tallis, Shy Boy, ended up on the record. And that was an amazing transition. I went from driving my Ford Pinto in Buffalo, and you know the fake tire you get in case you get a flat to put on to just long enough to get to the gas station. I drove around on that thing for 2 years on the fake tire. I was totally broke and poor. And sure enough, Dave flew me out after that tour was done. I had that meeting at the beginning of the Tallis Ingve tour, and went out and we started work with them a little bit, and then we got Steve over and got Greg in the band, and everything in my life changed. I moved to LA, and it was quite an amazing transition.
And what's always interesting about music as compared to other careers is, I mean, what year was that this all happened? Was 80, what year did
Summer of 85.
85. So you and Steve are still close, still playing together.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and it's how many, you know, the bonds that you create in the music industry just seem to be really strong, especially everyone you play with. It seems like you guys are always together and always writing and coming up with things.
Well, I'm very, very lucky to play with some not only great players, but wonderful people. Steve Vai, Greg Bissonette, Brett Tuggle, the keyboard player for Eat 'Em and Smile, amazing people. The guys in Mr. Big, great guys, Richie Cosson, Mike Portnoy, the guys at Sons of Apollo. Really great people, great players. You know, I do hear stories of some lunatics here and there, and people that are very troubled people and that are difficult to work with. But I've been very, very lucky to be around people that have it very together, personally and musically, and therefore you can get the job done. You can get up there and do a great show and write excellent songs and be better. I try to discourage people from getting involved in things that will distract them from that thing, which is playing and being the best you can be.
So recently you moved to Nashville.
Yeah.
How you liking that?
Nashville's awesome. I love it. It's Music City.
Music City. Weather's pretty nice there as well.
Not bad at all. Not bad at all.
So what's in the horizon? What are you working on right now?
Well, another friend of mine that's in Nashville, he got there before I did. He's one of my inspirations for moving there. Is a guy named Ray Lugier, is a drummer, dear friend of mine, great drummer. We're doing just a bass and drum record. I don't know what else we're going to put in there or how we're going to do it, but we get together at his house early morning after his kids go off to school, and we'll write up some crazy stuff, some impossible things. So we're compiling all that. He's going to be out on tour with Korn for a while, so I'm going to work on my part of it. When he gets back, I hope to perform it all relatively live and record it like that. That'll be cool. Then I just finished a tour with the Winery Dogs. I love playing in that band, and we're probably going to start a record next year, go out and do that. And then I'm in the middle of playing bass for the Sons of Apollo, which is another band that I'm really enjoying playing with very much. Bumblefoot, Jeff Scott Soto, Derek Sherinian, Mike Portnoy, and myself. We have just a great time. We had a wonderful run last time. A more progressive style music, but very cool. And I got to practice more.
Well, that's great. I mean, it's a lot of incredible musicians that you play with. I mean, we all know you are incredible yourself. How do you keep it all straight? I mean, there's a lot going on.
It's tough. One year I did like about 5 different tours, which meant I had to learn an hour and a half or 2 hour show 5 times differently each time. So sometimes it gets a little tough, but I play by ear. So when you can hear what's going on around you, it's a little easier to kind of grab onto. Though I think if I played by written music or tab, it would be a lot easier to review that stuff than have to relearn it by ear. But I think the ear does help me out a little bit in being able to catch up. And it's good. Push yourself a little harder, you know. It's, you know, I got to remember it, get up and perform it and do it right and do it the best you can. Then go off, and a week later you're with a whole other band and the whole other tour. So I think in the end it adds to your musical, I don't know, your depth that you might have, and your style, your tone, your sound, your sensibility when you go into write a song. And, you know, I think it's a good thing to push yourself sometimes in that respect. For me, it is. Maybe not for everybody it is. Maybe you're better off focused in one band for the rest of your life. But for me, I do like to bounce around a bit. It's nice.
When you're on the road with Winery Dogs, so 3 of you have now your second album, been on the road a couple of years. Does the song change from the beginning to the end of the tour?
Oh, yeah. We always say we wish we could record the album at the end of the tour, because by then you've got it all, you're improvising and you feel, oh, let's take this another 8 bars. Oh, well, yeah, when the end comes, let's try it. You know, we got all these new ideas up there. So it's kind of a good thing that happened with the Winery Dice. We took some time off. So now we go back and do a third record. We're kind of fresh again. We got some new ideas and things like that. So that'll be kind of cool to do that. But yeah, you're right. When you're on a tour, you're always coming up with new ways of doing things and but the original way you recorded it generally is how people remember it, because that's the record they have. So we try not to drift too far, because then maybe it becomes unrecognizable. But it's fun to move around. Some players are more improvisational than others. Some people stick with the script exactly, and there's a real art to that and a real beauty to that. But then some people get real improvisational. There's a real art and beauty to that too. So it's which is a better color, blue or green? It's what you prefer. And I generally go for the improvisational thing. But when I find myself in a thing where I got to play exactly the same thing every night, that's a challenge. And I come out of it, I think, more well-versed as a player to be able to do things like that.
So you like to improvise, you like to stretch it around. Who, when you're working with, doesn't really like that so much when you're playing live?
Funny you should mention it, but Steve Vai. Now, Steve is a great improviser, and we do a lot of things that are off the top of our heads on stage. So don't get me wrong. It's really, there's an urgency and a freshness to the show. But there are some songs that must be played exactly like they are on the record. And for me, one of them is For the Love of God. It was a very famous song by Steve. And it just plays a dung, 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 dung. And you can't change, because he's holding over it. And it's got to be exactly right, because this is the foundation. So I didn't really realize that. And I went dung, 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 dung. Dun, 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 dun. And, oh, wait, what was that? What was that? It turned around and said, oh, I see you want it exactly like the record. Because they're passing tones and they work and you can move around. And as an improviser, you would move around, keep the essence of it, but he didn't want that. So I thought, okay, I get it. So it's got to be exactly right. So I took the challenge and I planted my feet and hit it exactly right. I remember when we did the Live at the Astoria DVD, we recorded the whole show during the day to make sure, in case we had a dropout, that we had all the bass parts, guitar parts, drums, everything in there, so we could take a piece out of it, want to move it later in case there's a problem, so you wouldn't lose the show and the recording. And he sat in a chair in the middle of the stage and listened to the whole band play the whole set. And in my mind, I go, I'm going to hit this thing so right on. No matter what, I'm going to play it exactly the way he wants it. I wanted to meet that criteria. So we got done. He stood up, walked over, gave me a hug. He goes, exactly. That was exactly right. So thank God. So now I'm glad we got that recorded. So now I can go. No, I didn't really. But it was nice to have that different kind of challenge. Because it's not what I do. It's not my thing. So, and I urge other musicians, sometimes you take a left turn. Do a type of music you don't normally do. If you're a wild player, play super simple. If you're super simple, try playing some more adventurous stuff, just to round things out more. So that's kind of my story, sad but true.
All right, Billy, looking back on your entire career, listening and playing with all these different musicians, what would you tell a young teenage Billy to differently, same, what would you say to him?
Wow. Well, I try to encourage a young player to do a lot of what I did, because the guys from my generation, maybe I'm just a little short-sighted on this and a little prejudiced towards my group of people. But we grew up listening to a lot of different kinds of music. And as you get older and live through years and years of playing, you gain wisdom, and you gain a temperament, and you gain an understanding that you can't just get in a couple of days. You can't get short. There's no shortcut to it. So I would say do the heavy lifting from the very beginning. Hit it hard. Hit it as much as you can. Spend as much time as possible. Expose yourself to as much music as you can, which is pretty much I'm telling myself what I had already done. But for a young player these days, I would really recommend exactly that, because I do think it results in a well-rounded player that can handle almost anything that's put in front of them. I think that's important. And I do believe that we have a lot of wonderful, incredible players today, because myself, I did it also. We stood on the shoulders of those that came before us. And I'm happy for people to stand on my shoulders, and anything that I've done that they might find as a positive influence or push them in a particular direction, I hope that's the case. So listen. We've got YouTube now, and everything you can imagine is already there. And not only can you hear it, you can watch it being played too. So just really, really take advantage of everything that's available to you now, and just go dive in the deep end. And you may take a couple mouthfuls of water, but keep swimming and just keep at it. I think it's a great, great time to be a musician.
Billy, thank you for spending some time with us today. It's been really a blast.
Great.
And everybody out there, thank you for watching another episode of Kickback with Hartke. Stay tuned for the next one. You never know who's going to stop by, and we'll see you next time.
All right.